You might know her as the couture philanthropist, but before she achieved that status, Mouna Ayoub was referred to as the woman who married her husband and ran off to squander all of his wealth. In reality, that's far from the truth. Only 20 when she tied the knot with a Saudi Arabian billionaire, Mouna thought her life was going to change for good. Unfortunately, she had no idea she was going to be trapped in a golden cage for 20 more years. So how did she manage to escape the bondage of the Arab billionaire? How did she build a multi-million-dollar empire in a foreign country? And why was she hated by all of Saudi Arabia? Let's get into it. Mouna Ayoub has always been a very beautiful woman. She was born on the 27th of February 1957 in Kuwait to a Maronite Christian family who weren't very well-to-do. Not much is known about her younger days, but right from her childhood, her mother instilled a sense of style and a love for fashion in her. Because Mouna was raised in a very Western way, as soon as she finished high school, she went off to university and eventually found work as a waitress to support herself. It was while working that she met a successful businessman in a newly oil-rich Saudi Arabia who would change her life forever. Like most relationships, the early stages of Mouna and her newfound love's relationship was like a dream. He was a very wealthy man who, at the time, was one of the richest men in Saudi Arabia. Never mind that he was about 20 years older than her. At the moment, all Mouna saw was a handsome and wealthy man of the world who, on bended knee, professed undying love and devotion. Naturally, she was completely enamored by this and was eventually swept away to live in a faraway land where all that surrounded her were jewels, servants, and eventually children. Before they made their way back to Saudi Arabia on their second meeting, the man Nasser al-Rashid had offered Mouna £50, which she was to use at the finest hairdresser in Paris. The young girl, who previously had to work for everything she had in life, would later say that she was seduced by the luxury he had to offer. Plus, it didn't help that she was fascinated by haute couture, and this man was ready to provide it all for her. But little did she know that it all came at a cost. A few months after their initial meeting, Mr. al-Rashid popped the question, giving the young Mouna a choice to marry him. The catch was that she had to convert to Islam. Mouna, who had grown up in a predominantly Muslim country, was compliant, so she willingly changed her faith to be with her soon-to-be husband. Taking her growing collection of Chanel and Saint Laurent dresses with her, Mouna joined her new husband in Riyadh in 1978. Unfortunately, this would be the beginning of a culture shock that lasted for 20 years, during which she never stopped crying. On arrival, Mouna was informed she would not be allowed to wear her luxury outfits. Instead, she was relegated to a burqa, a traditional cloth most women in Islamic cultures wear. In fact, one time she was rapped on the knuckles by religious police because she had exposed an arm during Ramadan. Afterward, Mouna was told she was forbidden from going to the cinema, couldn't talk to any man who wasn't her husband, and was required to stay home at all times. She recalled at some point that soon after they wed, her husband had overheard her laughing with foreign male guests at a dinner party in Saudi Arabia. He was so irritated by this action that he yelled from across the room for Mouna to shut up. This was one of the very many red flags she would begin to notice. But at this time, it was too late as she was already legally married to him. For years, she languished in the huge palace built for her by her husband, referring to it as a gilded cage where she felt herself to be unjustly treated and powerless. But there was no denying that she was given the most luxurious dresses, and she also accumulated a huge collection of jewels. Yet, what was the use, as she was only allowed to wear her black Arab cloak and a veil? Mouna explained that while on one hand no luxury was refused to her, on the other she had to continually hide herself away. To make matters worse, visitations abroad were the same story. On one particular visit to London in her 80s, Mouna planned to go with her husband, who was a member of a Saudi delegation, to dine with Margaret Thatcher. In high hopes that she would be allowed along since they weren't in Saudi, she spent the entire night dressing herself up in a Chanel suit, and when she was done, she waited. When her husband arrived, he simply asked, "Where do you think you're going?" Since when have Saudi wives gone out with their husbands? Whether it's Great Britain, America, or anywhere else, Saudi wives stay at home. Sadly, Mouna often had to resort to rather comical ways to circumvent the traditions that keep Saudi women wrapped. She explained that one time when they were together in Tunisia, she disobeyed her husband's warning to not leave the hotel. Unfortunately, she ended up running into him at a china shop, but his colleagues didn't recognize her because they'd never seen her unveiled before. Interestingly, Mouna even went as far as disguising herself as one of the crew members on the family yacht just so she could have some fun time to herself. It wasn't until one of her 5 children fell ill with leukemia and needed to be treated in the US that Mouna finally made up her mind to leave her husband. Through her daily interactions with doctors and nurses, she evolved from being just another member of her husband's household staff to a valued partner in her child's care. This transformation was really important for Mouna. Soon, she was driving around town in her own Porsche and dressing like her new heroine, Madonna. However, upon returning to Saudi Arabia, she confessed to her husband that she had fallen in love with an American fitness instructor. As expected, his response was chilling, as he stated that adulterous women deserve to die. This, she says, led her to attempt to self-exit, downing several pills of Valium. After 3 days in the hospital, Mouna found herself addicted to Prozac and other antidepressants. It was through this haze that she realized the need for her financial independence. So she began focusing on amassing her own fortune, stating that no one came to Saudi Arabia to do anything but make money. In her words, "I thought it was a pity to be there and not amass some of my own. Money was the key to future freedom." She began by selling some of her jewels and organizing weekly sales of various goods her husband purchased abroad. Slowly but surely, she became wealthy enough to invest heavily in American stocks, and in 1995, after 2 attempts at separation, she wrote a letter to her husband saying, "Marriage is more to me than private jets and yachts." This finally led to their divorce, and in 1996, she moved out. Her ex-husband remarried, and their 5 children went off to boarding school. Unfortunately, a clause that came with the divorce was that she would leave all of her children in her husband's care until they were grown enough to seek her out on their own. Initially, Mouna hadn't wanted to leave her children, but after 20 years of endurance, she finally decided that this was the moment she'd been waiting for half of her life at the time. So she agreed to it. After leaving Saudi Arabia, Mouna soon began a new business of renting out the Fosea, a boat from Bernard Tapie, which was the largest sailing yacht in the world until 2004. She'd purchased it for 5.56 million euros with an additional 18.25 million euros spent on renovations. To finance this, she sold several of her jewels, including the Mouna diamond, one of the world's largest yellow diamonds, for 2.52 million euros, a Bulgari necklace for 15.3 million francs, and a collection of Tawa jewels. Soon enough, she was raking in millions from this side hustle. Today, Mouna owns the world's largest private collection of haute couture with more than 10,000 items. She never wears the same piece of couture twice, and all major couture houses maintain an Ayoub mannequin for proper fitting in her absence. She frequently adds to her collection of more than 1,000 designer dresses and engages in occasional charity work. With a fortune estimated to be almost £300 million, she credits her wealth to the judicious investment of money made from her weekly garage sales in Riyadh. In 2000, Mouna published her book La Vérité as an act of catharsis and a plea for understanding from her children. She stated that the press in the Middle East never misses an opportunity to describe her as a dishonest woman of loose morals. Her husband says that she left Saudi Arabia with a fortune that didn't belong to her, but for the sake of her children, she can't let them pour out such venom. The final straw that made her publish the book was when a Lebanese magazine began a series of articles portraying her as Madame Bovary of the desert. Mouna initially had fears that her book might lead to further estrangement from her children, who, by Saudi custom, remained in her father's care at the time. However, she hopes that in addition to sharing her side of the story, the book will show other Arab women that they can exist without their husbands. To those who would rather cry in a Lamborghini, Mouna's story offers a rather convincing perspective. What do you think about Mouna's situation with the billionaire? Let us know in the comment section below.